All right, what's up to everybody? This is the Detroit Lions News Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Chap. And there's no James today. James is on the IR. He had a little bit of a sickness, so he's off today. And I'm going to take you through the cornerbacks, the safeties, and then obviously Drew Petzing spoke to the Pride of Detroit. We'll get to that right now, but just a great interview by Pride of Detroit. Absolutely fantastic interview by Pride of Detroit. So we are going to get to that. in in the Pride of Detroit interview with Drew Petzing, he spoke to Jeremy and Eric, and he said there was one key, thing that he said. We'll get to it, but here's the deal: all along since they hired Drew Petzing, I think there's been a little bit of uh, a misnomer. Okay, obviously you can't predict the future of what uh, Drew Petzing's going to be with this offense. And I kind of harken it back to you could sit in a car, you could maybe park a car, but you can't drive a Ferrari if you can't drive it, right? So in this case, with Drew Petzing, he comes into an offense that the offensive line does need some work, but it's workable. There's key pieces all over the team. Running back Gibbs, Montgomery, quarterback is Goff. I mean, that's a clear upgrade from his last quarterback in Kyler Murray. And then you just look at guys like Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Isaac Tesla and Sam Laporta. Like, this is a really good offense, and Petzing is inheriting a really talented group. Now, when Drew Petzing spoke to the Pride of Detroit, he says the key to any offense is it's got to be built around the players you have, Petzing said. You've got to highlight their ability and what they do best. So that's going to be the different game to game based on who is available. Every roster I've been on, it's been a little bit different. I'll tell you why I like that. Okay. It shows an adaptability. Okay. You're not going to have the same roster. You hope you can have the same roster, but we've seen from the Detroit Lions defensive woes, you're not going to have the same roster. There might be injuries, suspensions, whatever the case may be. You got to be able to adapt to your talent, right? So when Drew Petzing spoke to the Pride of Detroit and he says you got to build around the players you have, I take that with a huge it's a massive thing for an offensive coordinator to admit. I think a lot of offensive coordinators don't want to admit that they have to adapt. The best offense coordinators, like I think Ben Johnson, was able to adapt to his situation. I think, Kubiak in Seattle, he could adapt to the situation. It's all a case by case basis. So when you look at it from that perspective, very good on Drew Petzing. He goes on. This is in the article on Pride of Detroit. He says, I thought we were going to be more of a wide zone team, and a lot in the first offseason, it was emphasizing wide zone and certain techniques. That will go off. Running the ball, displacement, we can't just allow penetration, those types of things. And as we got going, I just didn't feel good enough to make it our foundation. So I like what he said here. Okay, I'll tell you why. Another reason, this is an adaptability thing, right? You go into the season thinking you're going to run one thing, right? And then the next time you see it for yourself, and you're like, I don't think this could be the foundation of this offense. It's not, when you get to the NFL or college football, the one thing you notice is that a lot of people fall to arrogance. And I think the key part here is Drew Petzing doesn't have an arrogance about him. Like, he doesn't have an arrogance about him. And that's a good thing, because when there's a lot of arrogant people out there that they'll stick to a philosophy and they will run it into the ground. And it might not work for that set of team. And I remember what Nick Saban said when he was coaching Alabama. He says, look, I loved being a power run team, but we had to become a spread team. And that's not easy for coaches to admit, but it's the fact of the matter. Like, when you get to a situation, look, we're not that type of team anymore. It takes balls to make that decision. We go on with the article. He says, to me, any good coach, I have to adapt to what we have. We were good at it in Arizona. It was emphasizing James Conner and emphasizing the guys we had on the line, and I felt like they did well. Okay, what Drew Petzing's saying, they believed in James Conner. They believed in the offensive line. He did not have a quarterback. No matter how he wants to slice it, he did not have a quarterback in Arizona. And I think coming to Detroit with Jared Goff, it's a clear upgrade at quarterback. For Drew Petzing to have a quarterback like Jared Goff, it's a clear upgrade. A clear upgrade for his offense. You know, you don't usually get this opportunity if you're Drew Petzing. You don't get the opportunity to basically go to a ready-made offense after being on a coaching staff that got fired. It usually doesn't happen, but here you go. Drew Petzing gets to come to Detroit. The offensive line in Arizona is meh, and after James Conner was meh. And I did find it interesting that Drew Petzing got the most out of Michael Wilson instead of Marvin Harrison Jr. But I mean, that's something that'll be said another day. Now he goes on. He says about shifting to a heavy leaning passing attack ended with the team finishing with more pass attempts than any other team in the NFL. He says in that process, like anything you do, you learn a lot about yourself. You learn about the game. Petzing said of the tough 2025 season, we changed dramatically, philosophically wise, in terms of what we needed to do to be successful based on who we had available on game day. I think of it as a play caller, as a coach, or a coordinator. Not that you want to be a part of a lot of those, but there's a lot of learning that has to be done when you're forced with the task. Like, hey, what do we do when something no longer fits and it's week 6 and we've got to figure out a way to score points and try to stay competitive? And we did that. We had to pivot and obviously became a little bit more pass oriented because of who we had and who we needed to highlight. So the key thing here is if you watched any Arizona Cardinal games, and I'm not saying anybody watch Arizona Cardinal games because the reality situation is they were a bad team. And Marvin Harrison Jr. was a guy that needed to be highlighted. Michael Wilson, Trey McBride, those guys were key players. And when they had a bunch of injuries at the running back position, they went to a more pass-heavy oriented scheme. You know, it would have been a regular coach speak to take some running back that they had, and they just say, "All right, we're going to send them out there, right? We're going to keep running the ball. We're not going to go away from our game plan." That's what they could have done. But they didn't. And I thought that was very, very interesting from the Arizona Cardinals perspective because they really didn't have a running back to show up when it needed. They had James Conner got hurt. DeMarcado got hurt. I mean, they were on a Bam night. Remember Bam night with the Detroit Lions? That's who they were down to. So they had to kind of shift their philosophies. And, you know, the year that Drew Petzing had last year showed me a lot about who he is as a coach. Who Drew Petzing is as a coach, with the players that he had left on the roster, the devoid of talent at quarterback. Jacoby Brissett or Kyler Murray, take your pick. Are they better than Jared Goff? Are they a top 15 quarterback? No. So I can't sit here and say that that Drew Petzing was put in the greatest spot to succeed. Okay, there's just no way I could ever say that. But Drew Petzing goes on. He says, when it comes to Detroit, what he'll do in Detroit, he obviously doesn't want to stray away from too many things like they're working like and things that quarterback Jared Goff likes. He says, we're not going to completely depart from anything that we've done. Well, there's things I want to introduce, and I think they're going to do well. Okay, so that was from the Pride of Detroit. Now, here's the thing I take out of the interview. Okay, great interview by Pride of Detroit. Just fantastic what they were able to do. But what I take out of the whole interview, and I watched it, it was a great interview. Drew Petzing seems like he can adapt to different situations. That's very important as an offensive coordinator. And, when he became the offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, I really didn't know what to think. He wasn't on my board. I don't think he was on anybody's board. But, if you're a coach like Dan Campbell's, you have people in mind that might not be on this, the normal, podcasters, fans. It's not on their mind, right? I looked at Drew Petzing after he was hired, and I was like, "Whoa, okay, I'll look at it, figure it out." The statistics bared out that he was pretty successful in the run game, except for last year. You watch the Cardinals; their run game was successful with a kind of nonchalant offensive line and a bad quarterback. I don't think Kyler Murray is a good quarterback, but Drew Petzing did the best with what he can. And Trey McBride became a huge focal point with Drew Petzing at the helm. Now, we all knew that Trey McBride was going to be a really damn good tight end, but I didn't think we would see him do what he's doing with inadequate quarterback play. So what Drew Petzing's been able to do really intrigues me. We could look at it several different ways. Like, I don't know what he's ultimately going to do with the Detroit Lions. It's very hard to say what someone's going to do with a new team. Okay. That remains to be seen. Obviously, I feel a lot more comfortable with Drew Petzing as the offense coordinator than I did with Johnny Morton. And it's just for the simple reason that Drew Petzing's called plays recently in the NFL. You know, when we go back to when Johnny Morton was hired, the last time he called plays was with the Jets. And he was a passing game coordinator of the Denver Broncos the year before with Bo Nix, not taking snaps under center. And I think everyone can, passing game coordinator, they did a good job in the pass game. The run game wasn't that great, and they did a good job, but it didn't come to fruition. And I think what everybody needs to know about the offense coordinator, look, you could have a name. You could think Mike McDonald was supposed to be the guy, or Mike McDaniel, right? Or Mike Kafka, which they do got on the staff. It's all about the fit. Like, do you fit? And then the second part about it is, and I talked to someone who does coach in football, and he said it like this: you love to see coaches that adapt to their surroundings, right? Not everyone has the ability of having the Detroit Lions offense. They don't have a Penei Sewell. They don't have a Jared Goff. They don't have a Jahmyr Gibbs. They don't have a St. Brown. But what good coaches do is they make the best with what they have. I look at this Detroit Lions team, and I think right here, right now, you could be a top 5 offense easily. And that they were a top 5 offense this year, even with an inadequate offensive line up to our standards. But to Drew Petzing, this might seem like a freaking walk in the park. I mean, when you have a quarterback like Jared Goff, you are in every game, and it's depending on, do you protect for him, yes or no? But I thought Drew Petzing last year showed a lot, especially with the running backs going down, with Kyler Murray as his quarterback, with Jacoby Brissett as his quarterback. It was really interesting to see what he was able to do with that group of characters. And Trey McBride looked great. Arizona Cardinal fans, they were like, "Oh, you wait till who you see." It remains to be seen. Like, you think about it like this from the standpoint of, Marvin Harrison Jr. He's a good player. I don't think anybody is shocked by that. But what you are, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a really good player. I don't think anybody's shocked by that. Sorry, I had a little bit interference right there, but Marvin Harrison is a guy that the Cardinals obviously are relying on, right? So when you think about Marvin Harrison, you think about what he's been able to do, what this Detroit Lions team has. When you look at Marvin Harrison and you look at that offense, you're like, okay, there's a little bit here that you're like, okay. But the reality of the situation is a pretty good situation. And just seeing if, sorry, there's some things that are happening in the background. But as I was saying, the whole Marvin Harrison thing, like, I think when you have Marvin Harrison, who is a guy that's going to be a focal point, and a lot of people that were Arizona Cardinal fans were like, hold up, this guy isn't being used the right way for whatever reason. And they didn't look at the quarterback. So that's what I look at with that article in that interview with Drew Petzing. What a great interview. And now let's go on to our breakdown. Obviously, James isn't here. We broke down every positional group up until this point. We're at the cornerbacks and we are at the safeties. So let's get to the safeties. Okay. This is the wild card. I think this is going to be the most interesting part about this breakdown. Okay. When I look at the safeties, obviously what stands out is you had at one point you had Eric Hollett there, did a pretty decent job. Daniel Thomas, Avante Maddox, Jalen Mills at one point, Arthur Millette. Um, uh, you know, you had Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, obviously, but Brian Branch only played in 12 games, which is pretty good. Played 95.7% of playing time. And then you had Kirby Joseph, who only played in 6 games. And, the crazy thing about the whole situation with Kirby Joseph and his injury, right? I felt like the offense, for whatever reason, if you're a Lions fan, uh, offenses picked on when Kirby Joseph went out. I thought offenses went at Detroit. Like they didn't have to look away. They didn't have to make these, oh, I'm gonna look over here, I'm gonna pass it over here, try to bait, try to, look at, not have Kirby read their eyes, right? And then when you had, Brian Branch go down, I thought that was a huge tipping point to the season because obviously you've seen the run defense absolutely take a crap after he left. And I don't think that's a non correlation. I think that is a correlation. When you think about what Brian Branch was able to do as the Detroit Lions, one of their key players, he had 35 stops. 35 stops. He had 19 pass rushes. He had 9 hustle stops. He had 9 quarterback pressures, 2.5 sacks, which would have been top on the defense. He allowed 271 yards total. His quarterback rating was 89.3, which is not terrible, but it's not great either. So I kind of take it away from what the safeties were able to do, and I go, look, the safeties. It felt like when Kirby went down, there was an obvious difference in the way that this team played. This defense looked a lot different. And obviously, you can point back to the defensive line and you could say, look, the defensive line wasn't that great. But when Kirby went down, it seemed like quarterbacks had an easier time going through reads. I don't know if you thought the same thing, but that's kind of what I thought. And when we look at the coverage grades in terms of on Pro Football Focus, like Brian Branch was 4th on the team. He had the 4th highest. Okay, not really great. He had 9 penalties. His reception percentage was 56.8. He allowed 301 yards, and he had 7 forced incompletions, 4 touchdowns against. Okay, so that's not great. But when you look at Kirby Joseph, and why I say what I say is, when you look at what Kirby Joseph was able to do, Kirby Joseph, in his 6 games that he played, he was targeted 9 times, gave up 5 passes for 62 yards. His reception percentage was 55.6. Okay. And then you add on top of it, you lose Kirby, you lose Brian Branch, you don't have Terrion Arnold, and we'll get to the cornerbacks in a minute, but it felt like it was like a mea culpa of everyone, right? Kirby goes down, Branch goes down, Terrion Arnold's down, and then DJ Reed, he never seemed normal after the injury. Like he had that injury that he had, it never seemed normal. And when I look at it from that perspective, like I'm just going to be honest with you, when Kirby went down and then Branch went down, it was a big time mess. And I think we all felt Amik Robertson was going to be the guy that could potentially help this team, and I think Amik did a damn good job being forced into a role that wasn't really meant for him. He's not meant to be on the outside. And then you throw Rocky Sin into a starting role, or it never really was healthy on that back end, and it felt like that. Now, if you had a pass rush that was dominant and you had depth, maybe you could have forced some plays. But when the safeties went down, when Kirby went down, there was an obvious difference in the way quarterbacks played the Detroit Lions, an obvious way. And I look no different than, you know, Kirby was in his 6 games. He had 2 stops. He had 4 stops. So he had nearly had a stop per game. He had 18 tackles, and he was just really, really great. Really, really great. And it was very, I would say, you missed the role of Kirby Joseph. You missed him a lot. And so with the safeties, it's going to be very interesting to see what we get out of it. Okay. And I'll leave it. I say it like this because we don't know the health of Kirby Joseph. I think the Kirby Joseph health is a total wild card. Is he healthy? Is he not healthy? I don't think the Lions really know. I don't think podcasters or beat writers really know. We're all guessing at this point. And if Kirby Joseph is indeed hurt and is indeed on a time clock, we talked about what David Chow said last week, which I don't really put much emphasis into what David Chow thinks because he lost his license with the California. I'll leave that like it is. But I would like to hear what Brad Holmes thinks. And is this an obvious need of position? Is this a need of position in the NFL draft? Is this a need of position in free agency? This is the major sticking point right here of the season. Obviously, Brian Branch, he might make it back for training camp, but I imagine that he'll start on the pup list. When you go down this rabbit hole, they're gonna need some safety help. So they might need some cornerback help. We'll get to that in a minute. But again, it's very, very important that they go out there and you think about all the things that potentially could go wrong. If Kirby Joseph makes it back, fine. If Brian Branch is fine after training camp, you miss him for 4 games, he comes back, fine. But the reality of the situation is there's a total wild card in the safety position. Do you go into free agency and do you, make a decision? I look at the free agents that they have out here. And I'll go kind of by position. Okay. So at safety, I want to see who's available, and we'll see who's available. I'm gonna go. You got guys like Jalen Thompson. You got Kevin Byard, who's a free agent. Donovan Wilson, Tony Adams, Nick Cross from Indiana, Andrew Wiegard from Jacksonville, who I like. He's a good tough defender. Melo Fonwu is also a free agent. PJ Locke from the Broncos. MJ Stewart, Darnell Savage, obviously Daniel Thomas from Detroit is a free agent. But the free agent list isn't very deep. Okay. Once you get past a certain number of people, it gets a little bit murky. And when you look at, players in the draft, like if we're looking at players in the draft, like who could be available for the Detroit Lions at their pick? Like who could be available, right? I think that's the most interesting thing. I look at a guy like, when you look at safeties in the draft, like there's a couple of safeties that come to mind in my opinion. I like the kid from TCU, Bud Clark. I think he's a great player. Obviously, he has a good forced incompletion rate of 17.1%, a pretty low missed tackle rate. He only missed 9 tackles in 2025. He missed 6 in 2024. He spent some time in the slot, spent some time in the box, spent some time deep. He's kind of like you kind of fit in as like a guy like Brian Branch. I think that would be interesting. You look at a guy like Cole Wisniewski, who I did see PFF put to Detroit. His missed tackle rate's pretty high. His forced incompletion rate is pretty low. Not a guy I would really look into. I mean, if Caleb Downs is there, but Caleb Downs is a top 5 pick. There's also a kid from Toledo, Emmanuel McNeil Warren, who he's a total ball hawk. He is a guy who forces incompletion at a 33.3% clip. He has a missed tackle rate of 15.5. He had 13 missed tackles last year. Just a great player. He had a lot of he was his passer rating when allowed was 50.3. His forced incompletions, he had 5. He only gave up 1 touchdown a year and 2 interceptions. So another guy you could look into. I think the safety crop for the NFL draft is a little bit. It's not as great as you would want it to be. So look, there's a lot of places that this Detroit Lions team can go. There's no doubt about it. But when we look at, the wild card of Kirby and Brian Branch, like there's a there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on, and that's how it goes. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in those avenues, because this is a total wild card at the safety position. It's a total wild card. So we'll see what happens at that safety position. Does Kirby come back? That's a key point. Does Kirby come back and be healthy? That's a main point right here, and we just don't know. I feel like the whole off season of the Detroit Lions up until this point is stuff we don't know. We don't know if Decker is going to retire. We don't know if Kirby Joseph is going to be all right. We don't know the prognosis and where Brian Branch is in his injury. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a new offensive coordinator. There's a lot of unknowns, but I think the biggest unknown that can hit Detroit is Kirby Joseph. Like if Kirby Joseph cannot play in 2025 or 2026, and he can't stay healthy at a good pace, then it's gonna be tough. Unless, of course, you make your safety a priority or you make your defensive line a priority. It's going to have to happen. And like I said with the defensive line last week, this is going to be on Brad Holmes to build this roster back up. He built the 3rd best roster in the NFL up when we were doing it last season. ESPN and The Athletic ranked the Lions the 3rd best roster in the NFL. And when you lost Kirby Joseph, when you lost Brian Branch, I felt like that was a huge, huge tipping point. And it was a huge point of the season. So we'll see what this Lions safety room is like. There's a lot of unknowns. But I think, a guy like Avonte Maddox, I would bring back. Thomas Harper was pretty good, but they're depth guys. Like if Brad Holmes feels like Kirby Joseph isn't going to be right, Brian Branch is going to take a little bit of time. They need to get the right reinforcements. And if we go into week 17 and we have 4 starting safeties, that's great for depth. And you could use Brian Branch as a bull wrecker instead of having to, put him at safety and do all that. So it'll be an interesting offseason, especially in that safety room. It's a total wild card. We don't know what Kirby's going to be like. It's a total wild card. And I can't say it enough. Like the safety position is right now it's a huge problem. It really is. So it's going to be great. All right. On to the cornerback room. This is where a lot of people are a little bit upset. Obviously, last offseason, we signed DJ Reed, who is a massive contract. And I thought DJ Reed did a damn good job up until his injury. And when he came back from his injury, it didn't seem like he was the same player. It did not seem like he was the same player that he was. And for whatever reason, he just didn't look good when he came back. Like he looked like he was still laboring, right? Obviously, Terrion Arnold getting hurt and then getting hurt again. A lot of people, they don't understand that when Terrion Arnold went out, People don't understand he was only given 56.1% of receptions. 56.1 receptions. Now he did give up, some yards, and he gave up 2 touchdowns. Like, you think about Amik Robertson, he gave up 6. Jack Campbell gave up 4. Terran Arnold was very, very good up until his injury. So, look, when they had the injuries, kind of like the safety group, when they had the injuries, Terran Arnold goes down. You insert Amik Robertson into a role that he's not usually in. He's on the outside, or you put Rocket Sin on the outside. It turned into a cluster, and I thought the injuries in the defensive backfield, whether it was at cornerback or whether it was at safety, were huge, huge, huge things that happened. I can't say it enough. I thought Terran Arnold, up until the point where he was injured, playing very, very good. The statistics bear it out. They weren't completing a lot of footballs on him. Now, the one thing you can say about Terran Arnold is that when he got injured in 8 games, he had 6 penalties. So that's a lot. But here's the reality of the situation. He didn't get beat that bad. He did not get beat that bad. When you have a 56.1 reception percentage, it's pretty impressive, especially when you think about DJ Reed on the other side was hurt. And for those 4 games from the Cleveland game on, so he was the only starting cornerback at that point. And I felt like the Detroit Lions defense could never really get healthy in that back end. It felt like, Terran Arnold, DJ Reed goes out, and then Kirby goes out, and then Arnold goes out. And then now you're focusing all your attention on Brian Branch and Amik Robertson. Brian Branch gets hurt. Like, we talked about the safeties, how that's a big question mark, but I have less of a question mark for the corners. Now, we know that Meek Robertson is a free agent. His market value is at $3.9 million, which is it's not that bad of a price when you think about that, what he was able to do. But if you're looking at some cornerbacks that you might want to bring in, if you're looking along those lines, Alontae Taylor from New Orleans is going to be valued at 11.1. Josh Jobe from the Seattle Seahawks, 9.7. Tariq Woolen, 8.1. Eric Stokes, 7.3. Roger McCreary, 6.1. Jack Jones from Miami, $5 million. Amik Robertson's 3.9. You look at guys like Darian Kendrick, 2.2. So there's a lot of guys that you could potentially go get. There's obviously Avonte Maddox. He comes in cheap at his market value. His market value is 1.6 million. That's doable. Rocky Sins is 1.3 million. That's doable. Jalen Mills can come back. 1.2 million is his market value. Those are good deals for good players for good depth. I don't think that if you ask these guys to go play to start, I don't think that's a good idea. But whenever you rely on depth, and especially when you had the injuries that you had in the back end, in the secondary, I don't think that you could realistically say that they're going to be okay. Like, it just is what it is. Like, when you lost Branch, when you lost Joseph, when you lost Arnold, you replaced 3 starters. And your depth behind those guys. Look, every team in the NFL is looking for a good corner. Every team in the NFL is looking for 2 good safeties. When you lose all 3 of them at one point, it's not easy. It's really not easy. And when we look at the cornerbacks in the NFL draft, I think this is better for Detroit. I think that if there's an opportunity for them to get a corner in the draft, they can do that. I look at a guy like I'm trying to get to it right now. I look at a guy. There's a couple guys I look at. Colton Hood from Tennessee. He kind of fits the grade on a Detroit Lion. Good at tackling. He's a ball hawk. Passer rating's pretty good. Against, he did a damn good job. He had 13 cover snaps, which was tied 24th in the college football. I look at D'Angelo Pons, who is he's a short kid, 5'9", 173. But you think about what he was able to do. He only allowed 49.2 completion percentage. He had 2 interceptions. If you're looking for a smaller corner that could replace Amik Robertson, there you go. I look at a guy also like Keontae Scott. Uh, Obviously, his completion percentage is a little too high for my liking, 70%. But he did do some. He did have the 6th most covered stops in college football. So again, it's all going to be based on what you think. There's guys like Xavier Scott who I like. I think he could be electric from Illinois. Um, he was really good at Illinois, and there's guys all over the draft. What I'm trying to say is, Brad Holmes is going to have a unique problem. A unique problem. He's going to have a unique problem trying to replace depth, trying to replace some of the players that he might be missing. It's going to be an interesting offseason, obviously. But I do count on Terrion Arnold to come back from his injury. I don't look at this as Terrion Arnold's been a failure. I think last year before he got injured, I thought he was doing pretty good. Now, he did have a penalty problem. It's clear, but he had really good stuff. And I thought for the situation he was in, it was really, really intriguing for him to have a good year like he did, point blank. I thought he had a good year based on the pass rush not being the greatest. No depth in the pass rush. But he did a good job at the reception percentage. He needs to work on the penalties. But I thought Terrion Arnold was really, really good. And in looking forward, like Terrion Arnold, DJ Reed, I think that could be a really good cornerback combo. I think it's just how you study the draft looking at cornerbacks, because there's a ton of them available. What you do in free agency, there's a ton of them available. And I think that's what they're going to look at. I think that DJ Reed and Terrion Arnold will come back to fruition. I think when they come back into the fold, I think Arnold's going to be pretty damn good. I thought he was, like I said, he was really surprising last year. And DJ Reed, he just never seemed the same after his injury. Like, people could say that's an excuse or whatever the case may be, but the reality of the situation is sometimes it's reality. Like, sometimes you have a guy like DJ Reed and he can't get up to speed. And that's not his fault, but it's the reality. Like, sometimes these players come back a little bit earlier than they should, and they never seem quite the same. And I have a feeling he was dealing with the injury all year long. He just never looked up to speed. He looked kind of slow, and that's not kind of the DJ Reed that we know. In New York, and then in the first part of Detroit, he was doing a good job. So the cornerback room is, I think you can look at it as depth. I don't think you need to go out and get a first round cornerback. Obviously, we're hoping that Ennis Rakestraw will come to fruition. You could obviously go sign your free agents like Amik Robertson, Rocketson. I think they did a damn good job. I really do. So I'm not putting a big emphasis on the cornerback position. I obviously am putting a big emphasis on safety, depending on the health of Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph. But as you look at the cornerback room, I think you can get by with some free agents. It's not a great free agent class. You don't need you don't need top free agents. You just need to fill the cornerback room with good depth. And I thought Rocketson and Amik Robertson did a really good job. But like I said, with the safety position, when we broke that down, when you lost Branch, when you lost Joseph, when you lost Arnold, that's 3 starters. You usually don't make it back from 3 starters. I don't care who you are, and that's in one positional group. Like we broke it down into two positional groups, cornerback and safety, but the DBs are one positional group. You lose three starters out of that positional group, it's not going to be a good thing for you. So, very interesting perspective there. Um, Ken Fisher says we need offensive linemen, and yeah, they do need offensive linemen. It'll be interesting to see what the Detroit Lions do because there's several ways they can go about it. Obviously, we are unaware of um, what Taylor Decker is going to do. We're unaware of what Graham Glasgow is going to do. We're unaware of how Kirby Joseph looks. We're unaware of how Brian Branch will look. All those things come into fruition, and it's going to start peeking its head probably soon with the combine rolling around. Brad Holmes will speak. It'll be very interesting to see what he says. But we've broken down every positional group on this team, me and James. And today I broke down the cornerback and safety room. It's going to be very interesting to see what the Detroit Lions do in free agency and the draft and what kind of things that they have in terms of the players that they have that are coming off injury, like Branch, like Joseph, like Laporta. Is Decker coming back? That's a major question. There's a lot of ways this whole offseason can get thrown off. So we'll see what happens on more of these Detroit Lions News podcasts. But as always, we broke down the cornerback room. We broke down safety. If at any point you missed any of our breakdowns, you can go to Detroit Lions News podcast on YouTube right there, and you can get the full breakdown. But thank you for watching. Thank you for watching the show. First of all. Second of all, we'll see you in the next one. It was a short show today because we had two positional groups by myself. But those two positional groups, it doesn't need a lot of hashing out. So we'll get back to we'll do the podcast next week. We're going to do what we need going into the combine. We've done all the positional groups. And we'll get back to regular podcasts here soon on the Detroit Lions News podcast. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.